good evening and welcome to our Learn and Wine workshop. We're sort of just reframing this a little bit. It's usually a learn and lunch or lunch and learn. And for those of you that missed our last session, we've got the pleasure of bringing you back and talking about exactly what we did last month. So welcome to our Learn and Wine session. My name is Paul Jantz and I will be your host. Look, some of the key things I just want to outline that we've done, this is probably our second one we've been doing with Virtual Financial, and this is all brought to you by Virtual Financial Advice, as you can probably see behind me. The key thing is here that Adam's always wanted to do is to provide all of you that are listening to this, call it learning, call it education, content, and the opportunities that you may not be aware of or may not be available in the marketplace. And this is what this is all about. It's also on the back of our latest podcast series. So if you have seen them or maybe you haven't seen them, we released a brand new podcast series this year. It was called Talking Numbers Property Plus, and Talking Numbers Investment Plus. And probably if you haven't actually heard or listened to some of the Talking Numbers Property Plus podcast, you're in for a bit of a treat because that's what this is all about. So in that particular Property Plus section, I had the pleasure of interviewing and chatting to a fella by the name of Jay Anderson from Jay Anderson Property, and Jay's joining us today. So that's what today's about. You're going to be online for about 35 minutes. If you've got a glass of wine, please enjoy it. If you haven't, that's okay. It will be 35 minutes. But hopefully in the next 35 minutes, we're going to talk about everything to do with property. So some of the key things we're going to look at why invest in property. We're going to talk about what we call rent vest. We're talking about the housing market. We're going to look at interstate markets and whether or not we should be looking at interstate markets. I'm actually going to ask Jay what's some of his hot topics as well, hot suburbs, hot topics. I don't know what I'm talking about. Thank God it's live. And then we're going to talk about how to start your journey. If you wanted to start your property investment journey, how you might go about that, and probably the role of a buyer's agent as well. So we'll be online for about 30 minutes. Stick with us. Let me introduce you to our guests. So you all know our CEO, Virtual Financial CEO, Adem Becirevic. How are you?
Good, thanks, Paul. Great.
It's good. Good to have you, mate. And Jay Anderson from Jay Anderson Property. How are you?
Fantastic, and thanks for having me, gents.
Brilliant. Well, you're both looking very sharp. So, but the other thing about this is our last show also for 2022. So as we plan some new content for 2023, which is going to be exciting as well. Adam, I might let you initially just, share a little bit about your relationship with Jay and why also from a property point of view that we're bringing this series, and we've brought out obviously through our podcast series as well.
Yeah, excellent, Paul. Well, it's important for all of our clients to get the right advice. And we've found probably, I've been obviously a financial advisor and a CPA accountant for the last 20 years plus. And I've seen on so many occasions where our clients have got the wrong advice, where they've gone to these property spreechers, they've gone to these seminars, they've bought properties out the back of nowhere. The properties have gone down. 10 years later, they're still worth the same amount. And they're just not getting the right experience. They're not building their wealth. They think they're going to have enough money for retirement. They buy this property. They get tricked into these strategies where buy a property and it'll pay your house off. 10 years later, they owe more money in their house than they did 10 years back. And there's no support. There's no professionalism and no strategy. So I've teamed up with Jay Anderson Property because I want to make sure our clients know what's going on in the market, but B, just to ensure that when they do buy something, that they are buying the right sort of property that has the potential to go up, where the research has been done. So like in regards to what I do, in regards to financial advice, we do a lot of research and we make sure that the managed fund or the share or whatever we're doing, or the MDA, whatever we're investing in, we have about 100 pages of research to back that up. Now, Jay and his team do the same thing. So we know the client is getting the right property at the right time for the right amount.
Well said, mate. And I think, we might get into a little bit of that. I know Jay and I have spoken about the old, I know we're in Brisbane here, but the old go to the Gold Coast and you stay at a hotel and you think, you see there's a property for sale and you think it's a great idea. We'll talk about that, hey? Jay, I might allow you just to introduce yourself, mate, if that's okay.
Yeah. So Jay Anderson Properties. I'm a buyer's agent, property strategist, and property advisor. Also a qualified property investment advisor. So why that's interesting is there's nearly 3,000 buyer's agents in Australia, and at last count, less than 150 are actually qualified to give property investment advice, which is scary, but I think it's important to note that I actually am qualified to give the property investment advice.
Well, that is scary, isn't it? So you've just got to ask the right questions, haven't you, at the end of the day, to make sure that they are qualified to give property advice.
Yeah, spot on.
Brilliant. Well, gents, let's get into today. It's an interesting one because I suppose we're going to cover a lot of different topics over the next 30 minutes or so, but it's also interesting because obviously things have changed a little bit, certainly since if you go back 12 months ago, certainly the way of interest rates have risen, the cost of living is rising, all of these sorts of things. Probably it's a good one for you to answer, I suppose, Jay. Is it still a good opportunistic market to be in? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and it's funny, and I think a lot of it comes down to human psychology as well, right? Naturally, we think, 12 months ago or 6 months ago was a much better time to be buying property, where vendors or sellers' price expectations were here, and we had 20, 30, 40 people fighting out for it above, and who was willing to pay the most, and it's going way above, perceived market value. As humans, we think, well, when there's 60, 70 people lining up out the door to get into a property, that's the good time to be buying. Now there's some uncertainty in the market. There's more properties on the market and a lot less buyers than there were. We've actually got the chance to negotiate, be picky, take our time, pick the right asset, and then secure it. So whilst there is a whole lot of negative media around, and it's very easy to get caught up in that,
yes,
fear mongering, all the rest of it, we only have to go back to the beginning of COVID when our wonderful news were telling us that property prices were going to crash by 30% in the next 12 months when, they actually went up by more than 30%. So the media has such a strong influence on consumer confidence. So it's important to kind of not get caught up in that, strip back to fundamentals. What is the data and research showing us, and just buying by using intelligent decision-making.
Yeah, brilliant. And we'll get into that because I agree totally. And that's the great thing of what Adem's been able to do and bring this for clients, because it's based on data and research, and that doesn't lie. Well, let's talk about it's probably, I don't know, everyone's great Australian dream to own their own property and then to get into ideally purchase another property in terms of investments. We've been playing a lot of Monopoly for a very long time. I know I've loved it since playing with my dad for a very long time, to get you into the mindset of investing and properties and renting and all these sorts of things. Why do people move to property, you think?
Yeah, look, Australians, we certainly have a love for property and all things real estate. I think it really comes down to kind of 5 key areas. Number one is property is a tangible asset. So that means we can see it, we can touch it, we can feel it. And what that means is, for the most part, that it's easier to understand. People can see a property, know what it looks like, what the purpose of what it does. So they feel like they've got a better understanding. Second of all, then you've got the ability to actually control what that asset does and add value to it through your own efforts. So by renovation, small development, whatever it may be. So that can happen regardless of what market conditions are happening as well. Australian property underpins Australia's wealth. As of November, $9.4 trillion is the total value of residential real estate. You compare that to superannuations at 3.3 trillion. The ASX is 2.7 trillion, and commercial real estate 1.3 trillion. So at $9.4 trillion, residential real estate certainly underpins Australia's wealth, which then brings a lot of confidence with it as well, because we know friends, family, all the rest of it that have invested and done well in property. Number 3 would be the power of leverage. The ability of how much you can actually borrow somebody else's money, i.e. the bank.
Yeah.
In most cases, you can borrow up to 80%, sometimes even more. Means you're only putting down 20% of your own money. So the power of leverage, the beauty of that is, as the property goes up in value, it's on the total value of the property as opposed to just the amount of cash you've actually put into it. So power of leverage with compound growth over a long period of time can be substantial. The ability to get returns via both rent and capital growth as well. So, capital growth is the ultimate goal we want out of property when we talk residential, but the rental income is what helps us hold on to that property. A lot of the times rents can cover or at least go towards the running and holding costs of that property, whether that be, rates, taxes, repairs, maintenance, mortgages, stuff like that. And then lastly would be the tax benefits. Should never be a primary reason why we're buying a property, but there are certainly advantages of owning a investment property, and a whole lot of tax benefits come with that.
Yeah, brilliant. Look, and that's the great thing about this as well. So while there's a heap of you on live at the moment, you've also got the ability to go back and watch this, because it'll be straight up on our YouTube channel pretty soon, and it'll be there for you guys to obviously watch this in detail and go back and have a look at exactly what Jay said there with his 5 points. Adam, just a quick one. Have you got anything that you'd like to add to that, mate?
Yeah, I'd just like to say that, it's really important that, our clients and anyone listening to this podcast, understands that there's a whole system in way to buy property, so it's really important to not just go and buy any property and not get the right advice, or go to a property spruikster, or you're going to sell you some property. You really need to get the right advice. And at Virtual Financial, we, obviously being virtual, we have the latest up-to-date software for our clients, where we can actually drill down and work out how much that property is going to cost the client, what's going to cost per week, per month, per year, and in 5, 10, 15, 20 years, what that property is going to be worth. So we can do all those calculations. Obviously, we don't give property advice. We leave that to Jay, but we can help our clients with the numbers and how that's going to look and how that might work. Some clients buy properties in their self-managed funds. How's that going to affect their super, and what's the long-term effect? So, yeah, getting advice. I'm really excited about working with Jay and our clients, and because obviously we want to see our clients do well, and the first thing is if they can buy property well, it makes a massive difference. I mean, I've seen it so many times with our clients over the years where they've bought properties out the back of Ipswich and stuff like that, and then big developments come through 10 years later by these big property developers, and really just brings the prices right back, because rather than selling their place for 500, they can buy a brand new one for 500. So all the promises have been promised for 10 years, it just doesn't eventuate. And so that's why if you're going to buy a property, you really need to sit, a buyer's agent is really important.
Now, while you mentioned advice quite a few times, is there a general advice disclaimer we need to throw in here?
Yeah, obviously today, that's a very good point, Paul. Yeah, everything today is just general advice. We haven't taken into account anyone's personal circumstances. Obviously, if you want advice, we're more than happy to do a plan and work through that with you. And obviously, you can see Jay and he can help you with the property purchase. Brilliant.
Now, I like this one, and it's one that I believe in myself. So, Rent Vest. Tell us about Rent Vest, Jay, and tell us, again, how it works and why it works well.
Yeah, so rent vesting is essentially renting a property in an area that you want to live in, and buying or investing in a property in a market that makes sense, that aligns with your personal circumstances, goals, and strategy. So it's quite a popular strategy in our bigger capital cities where prices, housing affordability can be an issue. But it gives the ability to, rather than pigeonholing, what happens a lot in, let's say, Sydney, for example, where prices are very expensive. People go, all right, well, my budget is $800,000.
Yep.
They basically go to realestate.com, Sydney, 800,000, what can I buy? And you're kind of dictated and you're driven by your budget, rather than making a decision based on, research, data, and what's the best outcome for you. So instead, you can go rent a property in an area you live, near your work, near your friends, near the social life, near the beach, wherever it may be, and instead invest in an area where the numbers stack up and it makes sense for you. So very popular with younger people, or even, young families that are wanting to try and set themselves up and get further ahead. And a recent study that was carried out by PIPA, which is the Property Investment Professionals of Australia, 45% of people interviewed said they would consider rent vesting if it meant that it was better investment outcome for them, which I think's interesting, and it's certainly steering away from the way many of us, grew up and our parents grew up, that it was go to university, get an education, buy a house, get a mortgage, spend the next 30 years paying it off. So we're kind of doing things in reverse.
And I do like the fact you just put me into the young category.
Only because I'm in that same category.
Love it. Now, you mentioned the housing market. Let's talk about that for a second, because obviously it's been interesting. Certainly, I know, being from Melbourne myself, I know a lot of people, I know a lot of Melbournians obviously migrated up north when COVID hit, of course, and there's still a lot of Melbourne friends of mine, whether they're Gold Coast, Brisbane, or further up at Noosa as well. So what's things looking like? Because I sort of go back a step as well, maybe, I don't know, 6 weeks ago, things like the block, I know that was on TV, and I sort of looked at that, and that was quite scary to see the different levels of, some of these houses that were pretty similar, but one sold for ridiculous amounts of money. Maybe those boys had a clever strategy. So what's it like out there? What's the real situation out there?
But I think, first of all, there's, it's really case by case basis. There's over 15,000 suburbs in Australia, and each suburb has its own markets within markets. So you've got different markets based on price point. You've got houses versus units. So, we talk about the Australian property market. It's very, very generalized, because there are literally tens and tens of thousands of individual markets that all happen differently. But no one likes that answer. People want facts, figures, and data. But what happened on the block was quite interesting, because I'm actually seeing that a lot on the ground, in that you can get a good property and all you need is two buyers that have got the financial means to go for it and have got the emotional connection to that property. And you can see that property take off and sell for a very, very strong price. A very similar property just down the road, if you don't have those two people in that same position, it's getting passed in. We just don't have that volume of strong buyers that we did, say, 12 months ago.
Yeah.
But if we have a look around the country and what's going, and I'm going to quote some of the recent data released from CoreLogic, and so this is as of November 2022. So if we have a look around Australia, combined regional, so all the regional markets around Australia are up 3.3% over the last 12 months, with every single state's regional markets seeing positive growth over the last 12 months. Combined capital cities is down 5.2%, with Hobart, Sydney, Canberra, and Melbourne all seeing negative growth in values. And our remaining capital cities like Brisbane have seen positive growth over the last 12 months. Listing numbers, which is one of our supply indicators, so how many properties are on the market for sale. Interestingly, we're 26.3% below the 5-year average. So what that's telling us is a lot of people are holding back on selling their properties. They're not being forced to, like the media is trying to tell us that they are. So people know that, hey, it's not maybe the great time to be selling right now. Let's hold off. So listing numbers, whilst buyers numbers are down, which is our demand indicator, on the supply side, that's lower down as well. So it's kind of balancing each other out. Rental market, as everyone will know, is incredibly strong right around the country. We've got markets like Brisbane, which have seen rents go up 13.6% in the last 12 months. So we've got rents going up, which again is a supply and demand story. What's interesting when we talk about, I guess, the media and interest rates and all that stuff that's happening, if we have a look at the loan to value ratio of the Australian property market, residential property market. So as I said before, $9.4 trillion is the total combined value of residential real estate. The total debt or outstanding mortgage debt is $2.1 trillion. So if we look at the residential property market around Australia as a whole, it's currently sitting at a loan to value ratio, or LVR, of 22%. So overall it's, Australian property market, we're not heavily geared. There are certainly people that have stretched themselves and are going to feel the pinch as, fixed interest rates roll off and stuff like that. But if we look at a snapshot of the entire residential property market, it's certainly not as scary as some of the newspapers tell us.
Yeah, brilliant. Good to know. So you mentioned 15,000 suburbs, which is interesting. I'm going to go to you shortly and say what are there any hot sort of areas or suburbs that you'd like to reveal to us? But sort of a question that's always had sort of at the forefront of my mind is, let's say, for example, I've got $1.5 million to spend. Should I be spending it on one property and investing in one property at 1.5 million? Or should I be splitting that up and looking at 3 different properties at 500K? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so it's really going to depend on the individual, and there's a number of factors that come into play, like do they own other property, what's their portfolio like, their age, their goals, what the strategy is. There's a number of different factors, but if very, very generally speaking, if we take the average, the average investor, as opposed to buying a single property at 1.5 million, if you were to split that and get to say 750s, you could get exposure into different markets, into different states, different types of properties. You might do a thing like we call pigeon pairing properties. So you might get a property that might have future development potential or value add potential in, let's say, New South Wales somewhere, and then you might get another property in, say, Brisbane, which might be a stronger capital growth play or a bit more of a cash flow play. So you can diversify your money into different markets. That minimizes some risk. It also minimizes stuff like cash flow risk, because if you just have one single $1.5 million property and the tenant moves out, that's going to hurt. And if there's something wrong with the property or you're buying the wrong area, and it takes quite a while to find a new tenant, in terms of cash flow, that's going to be a big hit.
True.
If you bought 2 750s and you do a thing, what we call staggering your leases. So you might have one lease that comes off its fixed term in January, the other one comes off in July. You're never in a position where you've got no cash flow coming in through the properties. So, generally speaking, I would prefer to go to two properties rather than one, and that's what I've done with my own portfolio as well as I've been building it.
Very brilliant. Now you mentioned Interstate. Let's talk about that for a sec. Is how many people and we can go into detail. I'd like you to go into a little bit of detail on this, but you mentioned right at the start, people like to feel and touch, and I think 9 times out of 10, do people want to go back and live in the suburb that they grew up in? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I think you're perfect segue into it, because I think one of the 3 biggest mistakes in terms of locations on where DIY investors buy. DIY investors that make mistakes typically buy in one of 3 locations. So location 1 is the area that they grew up in.
Okay.
It's that comfort. They know it. They're familiar with it. It's comfort for them. Number 2 is an area where they might have family or friends living. Again, it's that comfort level. Auntie Julie lives in that area. If I ever needed anything, she could go past and check on the property. I always say, really, what's Auntie Judy going to do? She's going to drive past and see that the lawn hasn't been mowed, but that's probably about it, right? That's why we have property managers and building inspectors and stuff like that. Number 3, which is probably the worst on the list, and I think we've all maybe even thought about this time to time or know someone that's done it, is buying a property in an area where we've been on holidays. So, imagine going up the coast somewhere. It's been a stressful year. You go up with the family. You finally get to relax. Beautiful weather, enjoying yourself. You walk down the main street of the town, past the real estate agent. You see the house in the window. Go, oh, yep, that could be a good idea. We could use it during school holidays. We could put it on Airbnb. It would be great, right? So out of those 3 areas we've spoken about, what's the likelihood out of the 15,000 plus suburbs around Australia that you've happened to jag one of the areas that makes the most sense from investment, research data, and aligned with your personal circumstances and strategy? It's probably worse than needle in a haystack kind of stuff.
Yeah. No, fair call. Let's go back a step before I sort of look at some other stuff. So is there anything, and probably Adam can give you a bit of a nudge maybe, or a bit of a punch, Is there any little hot areas or suburbs that you can reveal for everyone online and listening to this, I suppose, watching? Is there a hot suburb out of the 15,000? Are we talking suburbs?
So I guess again, it really depends on budget and strategy and all the rest. If there's a straight buy and hold, is there value add? There's so many different factors, but I might talk region as opposed to suburb.
Sure.
So one market that we've been very, very active in and very, very strong on is Toowoomba. So Toowoomba is an interesting town. It's often thought of as a very regional town, but really when you have a look at the underlying metrics of it, which I'll go through, it's an hour and a half drive from Brisbane. So if we say, Sydney, it's kind of like say Central Coast to Sydney. So only an hour and a half drive from Brisbane. It's the second largest inland city behind Canberra. So it actually has a larger population than Darwin, and it sits just behind Townsville. So at a population of last year, it was at about 170,000. It is a huge, huge town. House prices, kind of 450,000 to over $1 million. Strong rental yields. Toowoomba's been named in the top 10 regions for investment 2022 and 2023. It's not a single industry town, which is what we want. So it's a very strong local economy. It's a $12 billion diverse economy. We've got industries like manufacturing, agriculture, tourism, resources, government, healthcare. Healthcare is actually the largest industry, which is quite fascinating. It employs over 15,000 people in Toowoomba. We've got housing affordability, where you can buy a house for 400, 500,000, which is incredible. There's huge infrastructure spending underway there. So we've got stuff like the new Toowoomba Hospital, which is a $1.6 billion project. We've got the $11 billion inland rail project, large residential, commercial developments.
So it's this sort of, sorry to interrupt for a sec, but it's this sort of stuff that it's triggering me. So I wanted to ask the question.
Yeah.
Everything you've spoken about there is what Adam spoke about at the start as well, and you did, which is about research and data, isn't it?
Yeah, and this is, so we start off, how we work within the business is from a research perspective, we start off in a local government area or LGA, and then we get down to suburbs within an LGA, and then we get down to streets within suburbs.
Okay.
So it's kind of this funnel that we go through. So we start, LGA, suburb, and then streets within suburbs. So it's not just buying in a suburb, it's which streets within suburbs do we want to buy.
Clever.
And the other things you got with Toowoomba is, it's the whole supply and demand thing. Demand far outweighs supply, which regardless of what the product is or what the industry is, when you've got more demand than you do supply, then prices go up. You've got unemployment rates in Toowoomba, which are lower than the state average. So, we've got strong population growth. Current population is 170,000. Forecasted population by 2036 is 205,000. So strong population growth, strong economy, shortage of housing, and a strong demand. So, as an LGA, they all tick. They're all green ticks.
So let's talk about the property journey for people listening to this, watching this right now. They want to start their property or their investment property journey. Maybe, I know there's a lot of parents that also want to encourage their children to start at a younger age as well. I think that's another great opportunity. What's your advice there to how that should work or how that could work?
Yeah, so I think the first part, and it's probably what Adam touched on earlier, is getting advice. And I think the timing of when you get that advice is really, really important. Often people can get caught up in the emotion or the novelty of buying property. Go to your mortgage broker, get pre-approval, go and buy a property, and then think about getting advice when, the actual asset selection or buying the property itself is really the very last piece of the puzzle. You need to go and get advice on structure, budget, what the strategy is. Then have it start looking at kind of areas, regions, types of properties that all align with those goals and strategies. And then the very last piece is actually finding the house itself, which kind of flips things on its head on traditionally how most people do it. Most people go, hey, this is how much I've got to spend. Type in a very broad area into realestate.com and have a look at the pictures and go, oh, yep, that one looks nice. I'll go and buy that one. So the advice part, is the most important, and getting that in the beginning is certainly the most important part. Yeah.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. Adam, anything else you want to add to that, mate?
No, it's very interesting. My wife, for example, loves Toowoomba. She's been telling me for years we need to buy in Toowoomba. So it's interesting to hear Jay say that. So I'm sure she'll be on my back about that. But no, look, it's great to see the amount of research that Jay does and how they filter right down to make sure they get the right property. And at the end of the day, like, nothing's guaranteed in life, but as long as you do your research, rather than just buying off a plan or buying from a property spruikster who's going to pick up his 40 or 50 grand commission and leave you with some dud of an investment. You're much better off having someone work for you and have a buyer's agent. And me and Jay can work very closely together with our clients and making sure that all the numbers stack up. And then obviously we can certainly help our clients. So I'm really excited for what Jay can bring to our clients moving forward.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, let's talk about the buyer's agent side. So, Jay, obviously that's what you are. So maybe you can explain to us what's the purpose and let's call it the role of a buyer's agent.
Yeah, so I guess as the name alludes, a buyer's agent represents the buyer. So for years and years and years, we've had real estate agents who are a professional representing the seller. And they have a legal obligation to get the highest possible price, the best terms in favor of the seller, right? So the seller has a professional representing them, and the buyer never really has had one. Buyers can often fall into an illusion that the real estate agent is there to help them. Really, they're there to get the highest possible price and get you to pay as much as you can. So we're trying to level the playing field and give professional representation to the buyer. A hurdle that people often think is, well, why should I pay someone to help me buy a property when I can do it myself? But if you have a look at what we do in our day-to-day life and where we value professional advice, from servicing your car to, using an accountant, we use professionals and value their profession and advice all around us. And then when you go to buy a home, which is often the largest financial decision you're ever going to make, people think they can do it themselves. Now, we're buying multiple properties a week. We're negotiating on properties every day. This is what we do compared to the average home buyer who may buy a property once every 7 to 10 years. So yeah, the role of the buyer's agents, we represent the buyer and only the buyer. So we are paid, engaged and retained by the buyer. So we are only representing the buyer. An analogy I kind of use is, think if you're going to court and the opposition has a barrister representing them and you go in and try and self-represent, it's an unfair playing field. It's going to be tough to really get a good result for yourself. So yeah, we're there to bring professional advice and guidance to buyers across the Australian property market.
Yeah, well said. Well said. And look, guys, we'll be wrapping up in about probably 4 or 5 minutes or so. So if you've got any questions, please throw them into the Q&A bar or the chat. I'll moderate both. So if you've got a question to either Adam or to Jay, please throw it into the Q&A bar or the chat bar. Where was I going with that? Oh, look, and I agree wholly. I've used a buyer's agent. So speaking from sort of personal experience, I used a buyer's agent to buy my first investment property. So, and you're right, it's very much about sticking to your lane, isn't it? I'm not going to try and give financial advice to people. That's what Adam's for, and it's the same with you. See, that's what you're a property agent that's giving advice. You got to go to the experts in their field to be able to do that, like you just mentioned, whether it be an accountant or a financial advisor or a property advisor. I stick to what I'm good at doing, and and then come to you guys for the right level of advice to make the right purchase at the end of the day, which is what it's about.
And then, and some of the secondary benefits that fall under that are things like, across my business in the last 12 months, over 40% of the properties we've bought are off market. So they're properties that have never hit realestate.com on domain. We're getting first shot at them, whether that's direct from owners, from agents. So often when a property gets listed on one of the online portals, we saw it for 4 or 5 weeks ago and rejected it.
Yeah.
And then it gets listed and then the agent's phone rings hot and people think, oh, yep, this one's just been listed. Well, really, it's gone through the hands of probably multiple buyers agents and they've rejected it.
Yes.
And then it hits realestate.com, and then buying the right property in the right street.
Yep.
From LGA through to property due diligence, we look at up to 121 different metrics when analysing an area and a property to invest in. So can the DIY person do it themselves? Well, yep, if they do it takes 10,000 hours to become a master. If you want to dedicate that time to do it, fantastic, go for it. Or, utilize and value the expertise of a professional.
Yeah, and the other big one that's really important to note is in a situation where, let's say the DIY, I always get that mixed up, and I've done it for years, the do-it-yourself type of buyer, I get drawn in emotionally. So you think about it from, like if it's your home, that may be different, but if you're buying an investment property based on the data and the research and everything else, at the end of the day, you could go to auction and overspend because you're emotionally involved in that, as opposed to, well, is that going to be the best? And this is our limit. And is that fair to say? Because you're not.
Yeah. Spot on. And some of the early conversations I have with clients, some of the thing that always comes up is, we want to buy an investment property, but we also want it to be something we could maybe move to in the future if we wanted to. And that comes up a lot. And that's where we bring things back and go, we need to make sure, are we making an emotional decision or an investment decision? As soon as you start blurring those lines, you end up making sacrifices on both sides.
That's right.
Make sacrifices on the investment side. And then because you're trying to do an investment as well, you make sacrifices on the personal, emotional side. Yes. So you end up getting a property that doesn't really fit either purpose and doesn't do very well.
Yeah, and that's a cost versus benefit thing as well, because you sort of look at that, and sometimes, and I've had friends of mine that have done it, so they could be watching this, and I've had friends that have tried to do it themselves, they've overpaid, then the old buyer's remorse might come in and go, well, shit, we didn't want to spend the extra $100,000, but we did because we were there, we were caught up in the moment, and we're in the auction, and exactly, and now they're actually using buyer's agents. So it's a funny thing that sometimes you got to learn from those experiences as well.
Yeah. Yes.
Good lessons. Let's check to see if we've got any questions. No questions. We must be doing okay then. So again, if you've got anything that we're going to throw in there, please throw them in there and we will cover them in the next couple of minutes before we look to wrap up. We are spot on time, which is fantastic, given it is an evening session. And we want to sort of get this in hopefully before you're having dinner, but you might be having dinner at the same time. Guys, just in sort of wrapping up, Adam, any parting comments from you, mate?
Yeah, I'd just like to thank Jay for attending tonight. It's been great listening to him, and all his advice is fantastic. For our clients that are listening, if you want to have a meeting with Jay and myself together, we can do a Zoom meeting together. If you want to do it one-on-one, we can do it that way. Highly recommend that you contact myself or Jay, and if you haven't started your property journey, let's get it started. If you have started your property journey, well, let's review it and let's make sure you are on track. Well said. Jay, from you, mate, any parting comments?
Yeah, it's a big thank you to Adam, Paul, and the whole team at Virtual Financial. It's it's a nice feeling when you can align yourself with a business that's got the same values, approach, and there's a lot of synergies in the way that I run my business and the way that Adam runs Virtual Financial. I think our customers are at the forefront of what we do, and it's very much research and data backed, and it's just about making smart, intelligent decision making. So yeah, I just want to. It's nice to be working with a company that shares similar values and approach.
Yeah, thanks, mate. Well said. I'm sure Adam will appreciate that. I know we've had, during our podcast series, we had a lot of time to chat and go into a lot more detail, which is fantastic. So it's great to see you and great to obviously reconnect. So thanks again for joining us. both Adam and Jay. So to all of you online, thanks again. Again, I can't see any questions coming through. I'll just wait another 10 seconds or so. Doesn't look like it. But again, you want to know more, as Adam said, please connect with Adam, give him a call, set up a meeting. If you want to know more, go into each, we go into a lot more detail in the podcast series. So again, if you wanted to just get a little bit more learning, a little bit more education, which is what virtual financial advice have been doing here, jump online, whether it's Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and search for Talking Numbers Property Plus, Talking Numbers Investment Plus. Otherwise, until 2023, as this is our last show, Merry Christmas. Have a safe and happy break. Hopefully, you're finishing off pretty soon. I know we're working till about the 21st, I think it is. So, and I think the virtual financial office, Adam, you're reopening on the 3rd of January?
Correct, 3rd of January, yep.
Perfect. So until we see you next year, please enjoy the rest of your evening, and thanks for joining us.